morning, guys. Happy April 20th. Happy Monday. I hope you had a wonderful spring break last week, a little break from doing all the work that Miss Riley sends to you. I know it's not fun doing work when you're at home, because when you're at school, you're like in school mode and whatever. But anyway, so yeah, I hope you had a nice break and that you're ready to get back to it this week and do the packets that were sent or online work or whatever your parents have you doing. So yeah, anyway, let me know if you had a good spring break. You can leave a comment and yeah, I'll respond to you. Okay, so we are officially into the Merlin missions. We're officially into them. So I only had 2 people vote on like the last thingy, and so yeah, we're just gonna go in order because that's just what's I think gonna be the easiest. So this first Merlin mission is book number 29. Now my books are the old books, so my book is book number 29, Merlin mission. It's called a Merlin mission, but if you have the Merlin mission books, I think this is book 1 of the Merlin missions, I think. But anyway, it's Christmas in Camelot, so if you have it and you want to follow along, you can. The Merlin missions are a little bit different from the regular Magic Treehouse books in that they're generally longer. So like this one is 16 chapters as opposed to only 10 chapters. So this one is going to take us a little bit longer to read. We're still going to read it in a week, but I'll do more chapters a day than I normally would. So yeah, we're just going to go ahead and get started. Let me see if I have vocabulary for this guy. Let me pause for a second. Found it. Okay, so our vocabulary for this week, the first word is cauldron. A cauldron is basically a big pot that you can use to cook over an open fire. We typically think of cauldrons as being used by witches. That's probably where you've seen it, witches or wizards like in Harry Potter. The next word is cloak. And a cloak, you guys actually know what that is because I brought in mine to show you. It's basically a big sleeveless blanket that you tie around your neck and you wear. It doesn't have any sleeves or anything, and people used to wear them in the past to keep warm. The next word is fate. Fate is spelled F-A-T-E, and it's basically something that is meant to happen. Somebody, you might hear it a lot in like superhero movies or magical movies where somebody might say it is your fate, meaning this is what you're meant to do. The next word is fury. Fury means full of anger, just like overwhelmed by anger and upset. This one we've actually had before, so you should know the definition of this one. This one is legend, which basically just means a really old made-up story. The next word is quest, which is a really long search for something. When you are going on a journey to find something, you go on a quest. And the last word is thicket. And a thicket is like a group of bushes or trees that are kind of close together. Typically, you think about them being in a forest of some kind. Okay, so Christmas in Camelot. Chapter 1, A Royal Invitation. Sunlight had faded from the late afternoon sky. Puffy snow clouds were moving in. "Let's hurry, I'm cold," said Jack. He and Annie were walking home from school. Their Christmas vacation was just beginning. "Coo, coo." "Wait," said Annie, "look." She pointed to a white bird sitting on a bare tree branch at the edge of the woods. The bird was staring straight at them. "It's a dove," said Jack. "It's a messenger said Annie, from Morgan." "No," said Jack, afraid to get his hopes up. They hadn't seen Morgan Le Fay in a really long time. He really missed her. "Yes," said Annie, "she has a mission for us. I can feel it." In the hush of the cold twilight, the dove spread its wings and flew into the Frog Creek woods. "Come on," said Annie. "The treehouse is back." "You're just hoping," said Jack. "I'm knowing," said Annie, and she ran into the woods following the white dove. "Oh, brother," said Jack, but he took off after Annie. Even in the growing darkness, they easily found their way. They zigzagged between the bare trees and ran over the frozen ground until they came to the tallest oak in the woods. "See," said Annie, pointing to the top of the tree. "Yes," whispered Jack. And there it was, the magic tree house. "Morgan!" shouted Annie. Jack held his breath, waiting to see the enchantress appear at the upper window. But Morgan didn't appear. Annie grabbed the rope ladder and started up, and Jack followed. When they climbed inside the treehouse, Jack saw something lying on the floor. It was a scroll, rolled up and tied in a red velvet ribbon. Jack picked up the scroll and unrolled it. The thick yellow paper shimmered with large gold writing. "Wow, Morgan sent us a fancy note," said Annie. "It's an invitation," said Jack. "Listen up." Dear Jack and Annie, please accept this royal invitation to spend Christmas in the kingdom of Camelot. M. And that's what the invitation looks like. So you can see it's really fancy. Whoa, it's not focused. There you go. Christmas in Camelot, said Annie. I don't believe it. Cool, whispered Jack. He pictured a beautiful glowing castle lit with candles and filled with knights and ladies and feasting and singing. We're going to celebrate Christmas with Morgan and King Arthur, said Annie, and Queen Guinevere. Yeah, said Jack, and the Knights of the Round Table like Sir Lancelot. Let's go, said Annie. Where's the book? She and Jack looked around the treehouse for a book about Camelot. The only book they saw was the Pennsylvania book that always took them home. Well, that's strange, said Jack. Morgan didn't send a book about Camelot with the royal invitation. How does she expect us to get there? Dunno, said Annie. Maybe she forgot. Jack picked up the invitation. He read it again. He turned it over, hoping to find more information, but the back of the scroll was blank. He handed the invitation to Annie. Must have forgotten, he said. Darn, said Annie, staring at the gold writing. I really wish we could go to Camelot. The tree branches rustled. The wind began to blow. What's happening? Said Jack. I don't know, said Annie. Wait a minute, said Jack. You were holding the invitation and you made a wish. The wind blew harder. The wish must have made the magic work, said Annie. Jack felt a surge of joy. We're going to Camelot, he said. The treehouse started to spin. It spun faster and faster. Then everything was still. Absolutely still. Chapter 2. This is Camelot. Jack shivered. He could see his breath in the dim light. Annie was staring out the window. This is Camelot, she said. Jack looked with her. The treehouse had landed in a grove of tall, bare trees. A huge dark castle loomed against the gray sky. No light shone from its windows. No banners waved from its turrets. Wind whistled through the tall towers, sounding sad and lonely. It looks deserted, said Annie. Yeah, said Jack. I hope we came to the right place. Jack pulled his notebook and pencil out of his pack. He wanted to write a description of the castle. Hey, I see somebody, said Annie. Jack looked out the window again. A woman was crossing the castle drawbridge. She wore a long cloak and carried a lantern. Her white hair blew in the wind. Morgan, said Jack and Annie together. They laughed with relief. Morgan hurried over the frost-covered ground toward the grove of trees. Annie, Jack, is that you? She called. Of course, who do you think? Shouted Annie. She started down from the treehouse. Jack threw his notebook into his backpack and followed Annie down the ladder. When they reached the ground, they ran to Morgan and threw their arms around her. I was looking at a window in the castle and saw a bright flash in the orchard, said Morgan. What are you doing here? You didn't send the treehouse for us, said Jack. With a royal invitation to spend Christmas in Camelot, said Annie. No, said Morgan, and she sounded alarmed. What does alarmed mean? She sounded alarmed. What do you think it might mean? Leave your answer. But the invitation was signed with an M, said Jack. I don't understand, said Morgan. We're not celebrating Christmas in Camelot this year. You aren't, said Jack. Why not, said Annie. A look of sadness crossed Morgan's face. Do you remember when you visited my library and gave King Arthur the hope and courage to challenge his enemy? She asked. Yeah, sure, said Jack. Well, King Arthur's enemy was a man named Mordred, said Morgan. After you left, Arthur defeated him, but not before Mordred's dark wizard cast a spell over the kingdom. The spell robbed Camelot of its joy. What? All of its joy? Whispered Annie. Yes, said Morgan. For months, Camelot's been without music, celebration, and laughter. Oh, no, said Annie. What do we do to help, said Jack. Morgan smiled sadly. This time, I don't think there's anything you can do, she said. But perhaps it will lift King Arthur's spirits to see you again. Come, let's go inside the castle. Morgan held up the lantern and started towards the drawbridge. Jack and Annie hurried after her. As they walked through the outer courtyard, the frozen grass crackled under their sneakers. They followed Morgan over the bridge and through a tall gate. There were no signs of life in the castle's inner courtyard. Where is everybody? Whispered Annie. Dunno, Jack whispered back. He really wished they had a book about Camelot. It might help them understand what was going on. Morgan led them to a huge archway with 2 wooden doors. She stopped and looked at them. I'm afraid no book will help you tonight, Jack, she said. Jack was startled that Morgan read his thoughts. Why not? Asked Annie. On all your other journeys, you visited real places and times in history, said Morgan. Camelot is different. How? Said Jack. The story of Camelot is a legend, said Morgan. A legend is a story that begins in truth. But then imagination takes over. Different people tell different in different times tell the story. They use their imagination to add new parts, and that's how a legend is kept alive. Tonight we'll add our part, said Annie. Yes, said Morgan, and please, I beg you. In the story of the lantern light, she looked serious. Please do not let the story of Camelot end. Keep our kingdom alive. Of course, said Annie. Good, said Morgan. Come then, let us go into the great hall and see the king. She lifted an iron latch and pushed open the heavy doors. Jack and Annie followed her into the dark castle. So that's the doors to the castle. And we are actually going to read chapter 3, because with it being 16 chapters, we're going to read about 3 chapters a day. Chapter 3, The Knights of the Round Table. A pair of torches dimly lit the drafty entrance of the castle. Shadows danced on the worn tapestries. Ooh, we've read about tapestries before, I think. Yeah, tell me if you know what a tapestry is. Wait here, said Morgan. I will tell the king of your arrival. She headed through the huge stone archway that led to the great hall. Let's begin, Annie said to Jack. Jack pushed his glasses into place. He and Annie walked quietly over to the big arch and peered in. The ceiling of the great hall towered high above the stone floor. At the far end, King Arthur and his knights were sitting around a huge round table. They all wore brown tunics and had shaggy hair and beards. Ooh, shaggy. Their names were carved in gold letters on the back of their chair. The Knights of the Round Table, whispered Jack. Morgan was talking to King Arthur. Beside the king sat a woman in a pale gray robe. She had pale skin and brown curly hair. Queen Guinevere, whispered Annie. Morgan left the king, and Jack and Annie moved quickly into the shadows. A moment later, Morgan appeared. I just told the king 2 special friends have arrived, she said. Come with me. As they walked with Morgan through the hall, Jack shivered. The huge room was drafty and damp. There was no fire in the fireplace, and the stone floor was so cold Jack could feel the chill through his sneakers. They stopped near the table. King Arthur stared at them with piercing gray eyes. Greetings from Frog Creek, Annie said to the king and queen. Annie bowed and Jack bowed too. The queen smiled, but the king did not. Your Majesty, you remember Jack and Annie, said Morgan. You met them last summer in my library. I shall never forget them, King Arthur said softly. Greetings, Jack and Annie. How did you come to be in Camelot this bleak night? What do you think bleak might mean? Bleak night. We came in the magic treehouse, said Annie. A shadow crossed the king's face and looked at Morgan. No, your Majesty, I didn't use my magic to bring them here, she said. Perhaps a bit of magic still lingered in the treehouse and traveled on its own? What's going on, Jack wondered. Why does King Arthur seem unhappy about the magic treehouse? Ooh, King Arthur looked at them. However you've come, you are welcome in my kingdom, he said. He turned to the queen. Guinevere, these are the 2 friends who once gave me hope and courage in a time of need. Queen Guinevere smiled, but there was a sad look in her eyes. I've heard much about you, she said. I've heard about you too, said Annie. Well, allow me to present my knights, said the King Arthur. Sir Bors, Sir Kay, Sir Tristram. As the king named each knight, Jack and Annie nodded shyly. The knights nodded at them in return. Jack waited to hear the name of Sir Lancelot, the most famous of Camelot's knights, but the king never said it. And finally, Sir Bedivere and Sir Gawain, said King Arthur. The king then turned to the 3 empty chairs at the table. And there once sat 3 who are lost to us now. Lost how, wondered Jack. You may sit at their places and join our dinners, King Arthur said. Thank you, said Annie. Following Morgan, Jack read the names carved on the backs of the 3 empty chairs. Sir Lancelot, Sir Galahad, Sir Percival. Jack took off his backpack and sat in Lancelot's place. As he sat tall and straight in the heavy wooden chair, Jack looked at the king. He and his knights were gnawing meat off bones and slurping wine from heavy goblets. They ate without manners or delight. Jack wanted to take notes. He reached into his pack under the table and pulled out his notebook and pencil, but before he could write a word, a serving boy brought them food. Jack set his things aside. The boy put a greasy slab of beef on a soggy piece of bread in front of him. The food looked terrible. Not much of a Christmas feast, huh? Said Annie. Jack shook his head. Annie leaned close to Morgan and whispered so that King Arthur wouldn't hear. What happened to the lost knights? She said. After Mordred's dark wizard cast his spell, the king sought help from the magicians of Camelot, Morgan said. They told him he must send his knights on a quest to the other world to recapture our kingdom's joy. What's the other world? Asked Jack. It's an ancient enchanted land beyond the edge of the earth, said Morgan. The place where all magic first began. Said Annie. The king chose his 3 bravest knights to journey there. When they did not come back, Arthur turned against all magicians. He blamed magic for all of Camelot's woes. hence he has banned magic of any kind from the kingdom forever. But you're a magician, said Annie. Did the king turn against you? Arthur and I have a long friendship, said Morgan. He allowed me to stay in the castle as long as I promised not to practice the art of magic. A feeling of dread crept over Jack. So does that mean the magic treehouse is... Morgan nodded. Yes, banished from Camelot. I'm afraid this will be your last journey, the last time we see each other. Her eyes filled with tears and she looked away. What? The last time we see each other? Forever? Said Annie. Before Morgan could answer, the wooden door swung open with a bang. A wind rushed through the great hall. The torches and candles flamed brighter, making the shadows leap wildly on the walls. The sound of hoofbeats filled the room. A knight on a huge horse rode through the arched doorway. The knight was dressed all in red, from his shining helmet to the long cloak on his back. His horse was dressed all in green, from the armor that covered his head to the cloth that hung from his saddle. Oh, wow, breathed Annie. A Christmas night! Chapter 4. Who will go? And that's where we're going to stop for today. So, we're going to pause on that, and we're going to quickly take our math. Okay, we're on problem set 11. I'm just going to read the problem to you today. You're going to answer it, and then I'll tell you the answer tomorrow. Okay, there are two fewer girls than boys in Miss Williams' class. There are 6 girls. How many boys are there? There are 2 fewer girls than boys in Mrs. Williams' class. If there are 6 girls, how many boys are there? All right, try your best. I'm going to sign off so this video doesn't get crazy long, and I will see you tomorrow. Bye, guys.